Arunachala Jiva Arunachala.
Namaskaram. That was Sadhuam singing verse 19 of Akṣaramaṇamālai, which is the verse I'm going to be talking about today. What Bhagavan says in this verse is, kuṭṛamuṭ aṛuttu, eṇai guṇamāyp paṇittāḻ, guru-vuru-v-āy oḷir Arunachala. That's if we split it up into separate words. What this means is, the basic meaning is, Arunachala, who shine as the form of Guru, eradicating defects completely, making me as virtue, take charge. And what it implies is, Arunachala, who shine as the form of Guru, eradicating, removing or cutting off all my defects completely, namely all my viṣaya-vāsanās, along with ego their root, and making me as one who is endowed with every guṇa, virtue or good quality, especially sadguṇa, the ultimate virtue of just being as I actually am without ever rising as ego, even to the slightest extent. Take charge of me as your very own, so that I may never again fall prey to the evil demon ego and its horde of viṣaya-vāsanās. The first word of this verse is kuṭṛam, which means a defect, blemish, flaw, fault, imperfection, or impurity. And though it is singular in form, in this context it is plural in sense, because it is used here as a collective noun referring to all defects. Muṭṛu is both a verb that means to ripen, mature, be fully grown, be fulfilled, come to an end, finish or complete, and a noun that means what is completeness, perfection, ripeness, maturity, completion, or end. But here it is used in the sense of the adverb muṭṛam, which means completely, wholly, or entirely. Aṛuttu is an adverbial participle that means severing, removing, cutting off, rooting out, eradicating, or making non-existent. So kuṭṛamuṭ aṛuttu is an adverbial clause that means eradicating defects completely. The first defect, and the root of all other defects, is our rising as ego, the dehatma buddhi, or false awareness, I am this body. Because by rising thus, we seemingly separate ourselves from our own real nature, Atma-vichara, which is the infinite, immutable, and eternally blemishless perfection that exists and shines as Sat-Chit, pure being and pure awareness, I am. Without ego, no other defect or imperfection could exist. And so long as ego exists, other defects and imperfections are inevitable. So defects cannot be eradicated completely until and unless ego is eradicated. Therefore, kuṭṛamuṭ aṛuttu, eradicating defects completely, implies eradicating all my defects completely, along with ego, the root and parent of each and every one of them. All other defects originate from ego in the form of its viṣaya-vāsanās, that is, inclinations to seek happiness in things other than itself. Because viṣaya-vāsanās are the subtle seeds that sprout as other defects. In the absence of ego, as in sleep, no viṣaya-vāsanās seem to exist, and hence no defects seem to exist. But as soon as we rise as ego in waking or dream, viṣaya-vāsanās begin rising in countless numbers like ocean waves, as Bhagavan says in the first sentence of the 10th paragraph of Nana. And to the extent to which we allow ourselves to be swayed by them, they thereby give rise to all kinds of defects. We can curb the rising of defects, therefore, only to the extent to which we refrain from being swayed by the viṣaya-vāsanās that give rise to them. And since the very nature of ourself as ego is to be constantly swayed by our viṣaya-vāsanās. We cannot permanently avoid being swayed by any viṣaya-vāsanās whatsoever until and unless ego, their root and progenitor, is eradicated completely. Kuṭṛamuṯ aṟuttu, eradicating defects completely, therefore implies eradicating ego completely, and thereby eradicating all its viṣaya-vāsanās and consequent defects. As Bhagavan often used to say, therefore, ego is the adi kuṭṛam, the original defect, or what in Christianity is called the original sin, because it is the sinner without whom no other sin could exist. Therefore, we are truly born in sin, as they say in Christian theology, because ego is the source of both birth and death. And until ego is eradicated, we will continue to be born and to die in one body after another. Hence, to be free not only of all sin, but also of the disease of birth and death, we as ego must die by knowing and being what we actually are, namely Satchidananda, the one eternal, indivisible, and immutable infinitude of pure being, pure awareness, and pure happiness, which is eternally untainted and untouched by even the slightest trace of birth, death, or any sin whatsoever. So that's the first clause, kuṭṛamuḥ aṟuttu. Then the next clause begins with the word eṉai, which is a poetic abbreviation of eṉai, the accusative or second case form of a first person pronoun, singular pronoun, so it means me. Guṇam is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit noun guṇa, which means a quality of any kind, particularly a good quality or virtue, or more generally, any property, attribute, or characteristic. But in this context, it is used to refer to guṇavan, one who is endowed with goodness or all good qualities. That is the abstract noun, guṇa, is used to refer to one who has that abstract quality, namely one who has good qualities. I is an adverbial participle that means being, becoming, or as. And paṇittu is an adverbial participle that means declaring, ordering, or giving, but in this context implies making. So eṇai guṇamāyp paṇittu literally means making me as guṇa, goodness or virtue, but implies making me as one who is endowed with goodness. Just as in this context, kuṭṛam or defect implies all kinds of viṣaya-vāsanās, which are the seeds that sprout in the form of likes, dislikes, desires, aversions, attachments, hopes, fears, and so on, under whose sway we rush outwards and wander about seeking happiness in things other than our own being. Guṇam or virtue implies satvasana, the inclination or liking to subside back within by clinging fast to our own being, I am, and thereby just being as we always actually are. Since viṣaya-vāsanās are the inclinations that pull our attention outwards, whereas satvasana is the inclination that pulls it back within, they are two opposing forces. So to the extent that satvasana is strengthened, viṣaya-vāsanās will be weakened. And hence it is by nurturing satvasana in our heart that the grace of Arunachala gradually weakens and eventually eradicates all our viṣaya-vāsanās. When he first sows this seed called satvasana in our heart, it is just a slight inclination to subside back into our being. But as we yield ourselves more and more to its sway by trying to turn back within and surrender ourselves, it gradually grows stronger, and it grows into a stronger and stronger liking, and eventually grows into an all-consuming love to know and to be what we always actually are. Therefore, eṇai guṇamāyp paṇittu, making me as virtue, implies this process by which Arunachala nurtures Satvasana in our heart to such an extent that it consumes us entirely, transforming us into himself. Among viṣaya-vāsanās, some are more agreeable, subha, while others are more disagreeable, asubha, as Bhagavan says in the 19th paragraph of Nana. What he says there is, Nalamanam endrum, ketamanam endrum, irendu manangalillai. That is, there are not two minds, namely a good mind and a bad mind. Manam andre, mind is only one. Vasanai galei, subham endrum, asubham endrum, irendu vidam. Only vasanas, inclinations, are of two kinds, namely subha, agreeable, virtuous, or good, and asubha, disagreeable, wicked, harmful, or bad. Manam subha vasane vayatai nikompodu nalamanamendrum. Asubha vasane vayatai nikompodu ketamanamendrum solapadam. When the mind is under the sway of subha-vāsanās, it is said to be a good mind, and when it is under the sway of asubha-vāsanās, it is said to be a bad mind. Of course, when Bhagavan talks about subha-vāsanās and asubha-vāsanās, these are relative terms. Some vasanas are more subha, some are more asubha. Some are somewhere in between subha and asubha. So it's not that there are just two kinds, either subha or asubha. There's a range from extremely subha to extremely asubha, and all shades of in between. Therefore, when a person is seen to have good qualities and to behave in a virtuous manner, that is because their mind is predominantly under the sway of subha-vāsanās. Whereas when a person is seen to have bad qualities and to behave in a selfish or unrighteous manner, that is because their mind is predominantly under the sway of asubha-vāsanās. However, even subha-vāsanās are viṣaya-vāsanās, albeit less harmful ones than asubha-vāsanās. To the extent that satvasana grows strong, taking hold of our mind more and more, our viṣaya-vāsanās will thereby be weakened. But as they grow weaker, the ones that lose their strength most rapidly are any residual asubha-vāsanās. So whatever viṣaya-vāsanās remain in the mind, in a mind that is predominantly under the sway of satvasana, will be ones that are relatively subha in nature. In other words, the more strongly we're inclined to subside back within, the more good qualities will manifest in our outward behavior because of the subha nature of our residual viṣaya-vāsanās. Therefore, though satvasana is the inclination to subside back within and remain as pure being, instead of rising as ego to go outwards, it will be reflected outwardly as a predominance of subha-vāsanās, which will manifest in the behavior of the mind, speech, and body as good qualities or virtues of all kinds. Just as ego is the source and abode of every kuṭṛam, defect or bad quality, the state of egolessness in which we have subsided back within under the sway of satvasana and thereby merged forever in our own being, I am, is the source and abode of every guṇam, virtue or good quality, because our real nature is completely and eternally devoid of all defects. So when ego is eradicated, all defects and badness will be eradicated along with it, and hence any quality that remains in its absence can only be the quality of goodness. Only one who is completely devoid of ego, therefore, is one who is truly endowed with goodness or all good qualities. So since in this context, guṇam, the quality of goodness or good quality, is used in the sense of guṇavan, one who is endowed with goodness or good qualities, it implies one who is devoid of ego. Therefore, kuṭṛamuṭ aṟuttu Eradicating defects completely implies eradicating ego along with all its defects. So just as it means that eṉai guṇamāyp paṇittu, making me as guṇa, goodness, implies making me be egoless and thereby endowed with all goodness. But when I explained the meaning, I explained guṇam and I as two separate words, but guṇamā is also a separate verb. So this verb guṇamā, which is a compound of the noun guṇam and the verb are, meaning be or become, means become good, be cured or be healed, or be restored to health. So guṇamāyp is an adverbial participle that means being healed or being restored. And hence, eṉai guṇamāyp paṇittu also means making me be healed or making me be restored. Since ego is the primal disease and the root of all other diseases, making me be healed or making me be restored implies making me be devoid of ego and thereby restored to my natural and healthy state of pure being, which is devoid of all defects and hence the abode of all good qualities. Eradication of ego, the false awareness I am this body, Dehatma-bhava or Dehatma-buddhi, is the sum and substance of all good qualities, as Bhagavan implies in verse 13 of Ulladu-napadu-anubandham. What he says in this verse is, Dhanam, Tabam, Velvi, Dhammam, Yogam, Bhakti, Vānam, Porul, Shanti, Vaimai, Arul, Monam, Nilai, Sahamo Sabu, Arivu, Sa Turavu, Vidu, Imbam, Dehatma-bhavam, Arul, Ter. What that means is the awareness I am this body, Dehatma-bhava, being severed is all of these. It is dana, giving or charity. It is tapas, austerity or asceticism. It is velvi, sacrifice, offering or sacrificial fire or yaga. Dharma, righteousness. Yoga, meditation or union. Bhakti, devotion or love. Vānam, space, implying the space of pure awareness or heaven. Porul, the real substance or vastu. Shanti, peace. Vaimai, truth. Arul, grace. Mona, silence. Nilai, firmness, stability, permanence or nishta. Sahamul sabu, death without dying. Arivu, pure awareness, knowledge or jnana. Saturavu, accomplished renunciation. Vidu, liberation. And imbam, happiness. So Bhagavan says all these are nothing but the eradication of Dehatma-bhava. Dehatma-bhava means the false awareness I am this body. In other words, ego. So all qualities are included in the eradication of ego. So when Bhagavan prays guṇamāyp paṇittu, he implies eradicate ego and thereby bestow upon me all these good qualities. Of all gunas, good qualities or virtues, the greatest is sadguṇa, the quality of sat, pure being, which is the source and sum total of all other gunas. Though pure being I am is what we always actually are, our nature as such seems to be obscured when we rise as ego, the false awareness I am this body, thereby going outwards and becoming entangled with doing instead of just being as we actually are. Therefore, sadguṇa is the ultimate virtue of summa irupadu, just being, which means being as we always actually are, without ever rising as ego, even to the slightest extent, to know anything other than ourself or to do any action. Hence, eṉai guṇamāyp paṇittu, making me as guṇa, implies making me be endowed with sadguṇa, establishing me in my natural state of pure being, and thereby preventing me rising ever again as ego. Just being thus, without ever rising as ego, is our real nature, swarupa, as Bhagavan explains in the 6th paragraph of Nana. What he says in the 6th paragraph is, Ibidamaha manam hridiyatil tangavai, ella nine vugulam mulamana nan embadu poi, epodum ulla tan matram vilangam. What that means is, in this way, when the mind remains firmly fixed in the heart, what is called I, namely ego, which is the root or foundation, cause or origin of all thoughts, will depart, and oneself, who always exists, alone will remain. Alone will shine, bilangam. Nan enum ninevu kinjatumi la idame sarupamahum. Only the place where the thought called I, namely ego, does not exist even a little, is swarupa, one's own real nature. Here, when he says only the place where the thought I doesn't exist even a little, obviously he's using the word place here in a metaphorical sense. That is only in the state or in the condition, or the place. It's a metaphorical way of saying only in the place where the thought called I does not exist even a little is swarupa, our own real nature. Aduve monamenapadam. That alone is called mona. So when Bhagavan's talking about mona, he's about silence, he's not just talking about vocal silence. He's not even talking about mental silence. He's talking about our real nature, which is the state in which there is not even the slightest trace of any ego or thought called I whatsoever. That alone is the true mona that Bhagavan is talking about. That mona is, as he says here, it is swarupa. It is our own real nature, the silence of pure being. Ivaru summa irupaktukutan jnana drishti endrupaya. Only to the state of just being in this way does the name jnana drishti, knowledge seeing, experiencing true knowledge or real awareness, refer. Summa irupadavadu manate atma sarupatil leka sevade. What just being, summa irupadu, is only making the mind dissolve, disappear or die in Atma Swarupa, the real nature of oneself. What he refers to here as hridayam, the heart, epodum ullatan, oneself who always exists, sarupam, one's own real nature, monam, silence, and Atma Swarupam, the real nature of oneself, is Arunachala, who is always shining within us as our own being. Since the nature of our self as ego is to always rise and go outwards, it is only by his grace that we can be drawn back within and thereby firmly fixed in him as him. As I explained in more detail in earlier articles in this series, namely in the first 6 paragraphs of my explanation of verse 4, and in several paragraphs in my explanation of verse 14, the al is a verb for which there's no adequate English equivalent because it combines within itself 2 principal meanings, namely on the one hand to rule, govern, control or manage, and on the other hand to cherish, care for, take care of, take loving responsibility, or take loving responsibility for the welfare and protection of. So I generally translate it as to take charge, in the sense that a caring adult may take charge of an orphan child, meaning that they lovingly take full responsibility for the welfare, care, protection, and upbringing of the child. But it can also be translated as to take possession of, or take as one's own, in the sense that a bridegroom takes his bride as his own, meaning that he takes full responsibility for loving, protecting, and taking care of her in every way. Aṟ is the root of this verb, so it is used here as an imperative, and hence it is a prayer meaning take charge, take possession, or take as your own. That is, in this verse, the whole prayer is kuṭṛamuḥ aṟuttu, eṉai guṇamāyp paṇittu, aڵ. So the first two, removing defects completely, and making us as endowed with good qualities. These are adverbial clauses. The main prayer is aڵ, take charge, and this is a verb that Bhagavan uses in so many verses of Akṣaramaṇamālai and Arunachala Stuti Panchakami in general. This is such an important verb to understand the meaning. That is, God is always ready to take complete charge of us, but he will never force himself upon us. So it's only to the extent to which we surrender ourselves to him, in other words, the extent to which we hand over charge of ourselves to him, that he will take charge of us. So that's why Bhagavan is so often praying to Arunachala to take charge. That means he's willing to give himself wholly to Arunachala. He's willing to he wants to hand over charge of himself to Arunachala. And only when Arunachala takes charge of us are we truly saved. Because until he takes charge of us, we are taking charge of ourselves. That means we are surrendering to the control of ego. If we want to be restored to our natural state, we have to hand over charge to him. And then only are we truly saved. Then only are we restored to our natural state of inseparable oneness with him. To the extent to which we rise and stand as ego, we thereby submit ourselves to the sway of our viṣaya-vāsanās. So we can subside back within only to the extent to which we cling firmly to self-attentiveness and thereby refrain from being swayed by them. Therefore, when Bhagavan prays aڵ, take charge, what he implies is that instead of allowing us to remain under the sway of our viṣaya-vāsanās, Arunachala should bring us under the sway of his grace by drawing us back within and absorbing us completely into himself as himself, thereby not allowing us to ever rise again, even to the slightest extent, as ego. Aڵ is the main verb of this sentence, and it is preceded by two adverbial clauses, kuṭṛamuḥ aṟuttu, eradicating defects completely, and eṉai guṇamāyp paṇittu, making me as guṇa, virtue or good quality. So excluding the address to Arunachala, which forms the rest of this verse, the entire sentence, kuṭṛamuḥ aṟuttu eṉai guṇamāyp paṇittu, means eradicating defects completely, making me as guṇa, take charge, and implies eradicating all my defects completely, along with ego, their root, and making me as one who is endowed with every guṇa, good virtue or good quality. Take charge of me as your very own. By adding these two adverbial clauses before the main prayer, aڵ, take charge, Bhagavan implies that Arunachala takes charge of us as his own by completely eradicating our defects, namely ego along with all its viṣaya-vāsanās, and thereby making us endowed with the supreme virtue of egolessness, which is the source and sum total of all other virtues and good qualities. That is, Arunachala is always ready to take charge of us, but he will never force himself upon us. So he will take charge of us only when we are wholeheartedly willing to hand over charge of ourselves unreservedly to him, which means surrendering ourselves entirely to him by ceasing to rise as ego. However, since the nature of ourself as ego is to rise and go outwards, constantly dwelling on things other than ourself, surrendering ourselves by ceasing to rise and go outwards is contrary to the very nature of ego. So it is only by the infinite grace of Arunachala that we can become willing to surrender ourselves to him. Therefore, it is only he who can eradicate all our defects along with ego, their root, thereby endowing us with the supreme virtue of never rising again as ego. And by doing so, he takes complete charge of us, as Bhagavan implies in this verse. Kuṭṛamuṭ, eradicating defects completely, eṉai guṇamāyp paṇittāḻ, making me one endowed with guṇa, and aruṇācalā, taking charge, are not three separate actions or processes, but are just three ways of describing one and the same process, namely the eradication of ego. Since ego is the first defect and the root of all other defects, eradication of ego alone is the complete eradication of all defects. Likewise, being the source and abode of all defects, ego is the very antithesis of guṇa in the sense in which this term is used here, namely goodness or virtue. So being egoless alone is real goodness or virtue, and hence eradication of ego alone is making us endowed with such goodness. Since the very nature of our ego is to constantly roam about among viṣayas, objects or phenomena, under the sway of our viṣaya-vāsanās, and since we are swayed by such vasanas only because we willingly allow ourselves to be swayed by them, by rising and standing as ego, we are in effect taking charge of ourselves instead of allowing Arunachala to take charge of us. So it is only by eradicating ego with our wholehearted consent that he can take complete charge of us, bringing us wholly under the sway of his grace. That is, so long as we're under the sway of our viṣaya-vāsanās, to the extent to which we're under the sway of our viṣaya-vāsanās, we are resisting yielding ourselves to his grace. To the extent to which we surrender ourselves to him, we come under the sway of his grace and are free from the sway of our viṣaya-vāsanās. So long as we enthusiastically rise as ego and rush outwards to experience viṣayas, we do so under the sway of our viṣaya-vāsanās, which are what Bhagavan refers to in this verse as kuṭṛam, or defects. So it is only by weakening our viṣaya-vāsanās and the hold that they have over us that Arunachala gradually brings us under the sway of his grace. The means by which he weakens our viṣaya-vāsanās is by sowing and nurturing in our heart the seed of love to attend to our own being, I am, and thereby to subside back within and dissolve in it. And this seed of love is what is called satvasana, which is what he refers to in this verse as guṇam, goodness or virtue. To the extent to which the light of grace shines clearly in our heart, this satvasana will grow strong and flourish, and all viṣaya-vāsanās will thereby be weakened and shriveled up, losing their ability to sprout as likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, fears, and so on, like seeds that are roasted in a fire or left out to dry up in the blazing heat of the sun. As satvasana grows stronger by his grace, under its sway, we will be increasingly inclined to look deep within ourselves. And the more we look deep within, the more clearly we will see the light of his grace shining in our heart as our own being, I am, thereby nourishing and strengthening satvasana still further. Therefore, when Bhagavan sings kuṭṛamuṭ eṉai guṇamāyp paṇittu āl, eradicating defects completely, making me as virtue take charge, he is praying to Arunachala to complete this process of taking charge of us by nurturing the supreme virtue of satvasana in our heart to such an extent that it eradicates all our viṣaya-vāsanās entirely, along with ego their root. Exactly the same prayer is also implied in verse 69. What Bhagavan sings in verse 69 is, Bhumanam Puranamanakala Puranamanamaral Arunachala. What this means is, for mind, which is world fragrance, to acquire purna fragrance, graciously give purna union. That is what it implies is, so that my mind, which is still pervaded and polluted with world fragrance, namely viṣaya-vāsanās, inclinations to experience phenomena, which are what constitute the world, so that my mind instead acquires purna fragrance, namely sat-vāsana, the inclination to know and to be nothing other than sat, pure being, which is purna, one infinite whole, graciously give me purna union. That namely union with yourself, the one infinite whole, which is the real and eternal state of Jiva Brahmaikya, oneness of Jiva and Brahman. In this verse, manam is a noun that means not only union or marriage, but also fragrance, aroma, scent, smell, or odor. So bhumanam means world fragrance or world odor, which is a metaphorical way of referring to viṣaya-vāsanās, inclinations to seek happiness in phenomena, because vasana, which is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit word vasana, means not only inclination, but also fragrance, smell, or perfume. Therefore, bhumana mamanam, mind which is world fragrance, implies mind which consists of viṣaya-vāsanās, or mind which is still filled and polluted with viṣaya-vāsanās. Puranam is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit word purna, which means what is full, whole, complete, or entire, and therefore implies the one infinite and indivisible whole, namely Brahman, which is Sat-Chit, pure being and pure awareness, I am. Therefore, Puranamanam in this verse means purna fragrance, which implies satvasana, the inclination to turn back within and thereby to subside and dissolve in our own being, I am. Whereas the second Puranamanam, because Puranamanam comes twice in this verse, the second time Puranamanam implies purna union or purna marriage, which implies union with Arunachala, who is purna, the one infinite whole. Since Arunachala is the one infinite whole, other than which nothing can exist, he is what we always actually are. So union with him means remaining as we actually are without ever rising as ego. And hence this alone is the state in which he has taken complete charge of us, which is what Bhagavan prays for in this 19th verse of Akṣaramaṇamālai. Therefore, in both these two verses, 19 and 64, he is 19 and 69, not 64. He is by implication praying for the complete eradication of all viṣaya-vāsanās, the flourishing of satvasana, and our consequently merging as one with Arunachala by surrendering ourselves entirely to him, thereby allowing him to take complete charge of us. Completely eradicating all our defects, namely ego along with all its viṣaya-vāsanās, sowing and nurturing in our heart the supreme virtue of satvasana, under whose sway we as ego willingly subside back within and dissolve in and as our mere being, thereby taking complete charge of us, is the role and purpose of guru, and is possible only by its grace, as Bhagavan implies by concluding this verse, addressing Arunachala as guru-vuru vāyoḷi Arunachala, Arunachala who shine as the form of guru. Guru is a word of Sanskrit origin that has now passed into English because it is a word for which there's no adequate equivalent in English or other European languages. It is often used in the sense of a teacher, instructor, mentor, or guide. But in a deeper spiritual context, it means so much more than any such terms, because the real guru is the light that removes the fundamental darkness of ignorance, namely ego. As Bhagavan explained, Guru is the light of pure awareness that always shines in our heart as our own being, I am. But because our nature as ego is to face outwards, away from ourselves, in the case of most of us, it is necessary for Guru to appear outside in human form in order to teach us to turn back within. Only in the case of very rare and highly mature souls is it not necessary for Guru to appear in human form, because the mind of such a soul is already so strongly inclined to go inwards, but no instructions in words are necessary, since they're able to understand the silent teaching that exists and shines eternally in the heart of each and every one of us. The young Venkataraman was such a soul, so mere remembrance of Arunachala was sufficient to turn his mind inwards and immerse it in the infinite silence of pure being, thereby transforming him into the form of our Guru, Bhagavan Ramana. For him, therefore, Arunachala shone as the form of Guru, as he clearly reveals in this verse. Uru means form, so guru-vuru, in which V is a glide added for euphonic purposes, means guru form, or the form of Guru, implying both the outward form in which Guru appears and the real form or swarupa of Guru, which is what is always shining in our heart as our own being, I am. As we saw above, I is an adverbial participle that means being, becoming, or as. So guru-vuru-v-āy means being the form of Guru or as the form of Guru. Oḻir is a verb, it is the root of a verb that means to shine, but it is used here in the sense of the adjectival or relative participle oļirum, which means shining, which shines or who shines. And Arunachala is a vocative or eighth case form of Aruṇācalā, which is a personal form of Aruṇācalam. That is, in Tamil, Aruṇācalam is impersonal, Aruṇācalan is personal. But obviously they're one and the same, but we can refer to Arunachala either as Aruṇācalam, in the sense he's beyond all persons, but he's also manifests as a person, so Aruṇācalam. That is, in the eyes of his devotees, he's the supreme person, the ultimate person, the Purushottama. So he's referred to as Aruṇācalā. And Arunachala, every verse of Akṣaramaṇamālai ends Arunachala with a long A. That is the vocative form of Aruṇācalā. So guru-vuru vāyoḻi Arunachala is an address to him as Arunachala, who shine as the form of my Guru. Though Guru can appear outwardly in physical form, usually in human form, but in the case of Bhagavan in the form of this great hill Arunachala, what Guru actually is not physical, but only Atma-swarupa, the real nature of ourself, which is Sat-Chit, the one pure being awareness that always shines in our heart as I am. Therefore, though the physical form of Guru has a role to play, particularly as the vehicle through which its teachings are conveyed to us in words, the grace of Guru is in no way limited to its physical form, because its real teaching is the infinite silence of pure being, which is the light of pure awareness that always exists and shines in our heart as I am. So it is not necessary for us ever to be in the physical presence of Guru in order for us to receive its grace, teaching, and guidance. This is illustrated by the life of Bhagavan. Though he lived 54 years in the physical presence of his guru, Arunachala, that was after Arunachala had taken complete charge of him by drawing his mind back within and thereby swallowing him in the infinite light of its grace. Before that, he had never in his life been in the physical presence of Arunachala, but the mere thought of Arunachala was sufficient to prepare him to be drawn within and merge back into Arunachala, who was always shining in his mind as his own Swarupa. As he sang in the first verse of Śrī Aruṇācala Akṣaramaṇamālai, Arivaru Giriyana Amadaru Mamma Adisayam Idansail Arivari Darkum. That means it sits calmly as a hill, seemingly bereft of awareness, but its action, namely the extremely subtle action of its grace, is preeminent or wonderful, difficult for anyone to understand. Arivu aru siru vayadu, adu mudal, arunachalam mika peridu, and arivinilanga. Then in the next sentence, he begins by saying, though from my young age, when I was bereft of knowledge or awareness of anything other than myself, Arunachalam shone in my awareness or mind as what is exceedingly great. So the silent presence of Arunachala in his heart as his own Swarupa is what eventually drew his mind inwards so deeply, but it absorbed him into itself as itself. Therefore, when he addresses Arunachala in this verse as guru-vuru vāyoḻi Arunachala, Arunachala who shines the form of my guru, what he refers to as guruvuru, the form of guru, is not just the form of this divine hill, but is in a deeper sense his own real nature, Swarupa, which is the real and eternally shining form of his guru, Arunachala. Just as Arunachala was always shining in his heart as his own Swarupa, preparing his mind to draw it back within, it is always shining in the heart of each and every one of us, gradually preparing us in order to eventually draw us back within and thereby absorb us into itself as itself. Therefore, just as being in the physical presence of his guru was not necessary in the case of Bhagavan, being in his physical presence is not necessary in the case of most of us. If we would be benefited by being in his physical presence, that opportunity will be given to us by his grace as part of our prarabdha. So if it is not given to us, that means that it is not necessary. What is necessary for most of us is that we should carefully study his teachings, reflect deeply on their meaning and implications, and most importantly of all, that we should put them into practice by trying our best to turn back within and thereby surrendering ourselves entirely to him, allowing him to take complete charge of us by eradicating all our defects, including ego, their root, and thereby bestowing upon us the supreme virtue of egolessness. Though the light of his grace is shining eternally in our heart as our fundamental awareness, I am, and though it is always working tirelessly to draw our mind back within, so long as we willingly allow ourselves to be swayed by our viṣaya-vāsanās, we are thereby obstructing the work of his grace by resisting its inward pull instead of yielding ourselves to it. Since the very nature of our self as ego is to be constantly swayed by our viṣaya-vāsanās, the only power that can sow and nurture the seed of sat-vāsana in our heart, thereby taking complete charge of us by making us willing to surrender ourselves entirely to its inward pull, is the grace of Guru, the real nature of ourself, Atma-vichara, which is what shines outwardly in the form of this divine hill, Arunachala, and in human form as Bhagavan Ramana. Let us therefore surrender ourselves to its inward pull by patiently, persistently patiently and persistently trying our best to cling fast to our own being, I am, thereby subsiding back within, where he is always waiting to devour us as soon as we give ourselves entirely to him. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaya.